Hey everyone, so we are going to have a lecture today over Chapter 7, which is Navigation Menus. I always like to talk about the importance of the topic and to understand why it's important when I start every lecture. And so, when you're thinking about NavBars, Nav Menus, you're going to be hard-pressed to come across a site that doesn't have a consistent, easy to use, almost standardized nav bar. And so why is this important? Well, if you're building websites, most likely they're going to have a nav bar. And so it's kind of hard to find a website without a good navigation system. It makes the website easy to use. It makes it, user friendly. For them to find the pages, to do the things that your website is intending on doing, whatever that may be, e-commerce or searching for products or just sharing information. And so when it comes to the objectives, what we find out is that we wind up oftentimes putting our nav bars inside of HTML lists. And so semantically, if you think of what is a nav bar, what is inside of a navigation bar? Well, you have a bunch of links. And so when you have a bunch of links, you could describe that as a list of links. So semantically, what we do is we put our nav bars, we put our links inside of lists. And so very commonly when we have a nav bar, that's what we do. But when you put your links, your anchor tags, inside of lists, that's going to style them as a list. And so we have to kind of change the CSS to make that nav bar look like a nav bar and not look like an ordered list or an unordered list, with bullets and things of that nature. So, again, this is almost, obviously I think we know the kinds of lists at this point, but what we haven't done is put a nav bar in a list to this point in the class. Okay, and again, semantically, that's how you do that correctly. When we talk about links, there's some things we haven't talked about. And I know some people have done this a little bit in their labs. It's like, okay, yeah, we can link to another web page, like a absolute link. But what happens, you've probably been to a web page where you click a link and it opens up in a new tab, which is a really good idea because if you're linking to another site, and you open it up in the same tab, you're navigating away from your site. And you don't necessarily want users to navigate away from your site. You want them to stay on your site, So if you do want to link to another site, many times it's a good idea to open up that new site in a new tab. That way the user can remain on your site and continue to use it, without having to click the back button, which is what they would have to do. We're going to talk about linking placeholders. Now, if you've ever used Wikipedia, you've seen these links that instead of linking to a different page, they link to a certain spot on the page. And so you've got this really lengthy page, a long page, and up at the top, you have some links that can jump down to a certain portion of the page. And so again, I know we've all used Wikipedia. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's exactly where you would go to check that out. When it comes to media files like video and audio, you can create links to them. And so if you don't want to embed the audio in the page, you can give the user the option to click an audio file and play it. We already know how to start an email message. What we haven't talked about is calling a phone number. And so how do we create a link that when you click it on a cell phone, it opens up the app to make a phone call? And so there's some HTML that we can write that does that for us. Same thing if you've got like a Skype if they've got like a Skype app installed on their smartphone, that it would allow a user on their smartphone to click a link and open up like a video type session, a Skype session. We've seen these pseudo classes before for links. We're going to revisit them and maybe cover them in a little bit more detail. The a:*link, a:*visited, so on and so forth. And then again, I know we've talked about text decoration and borders again, but again, just a little bit of a review, so that's a good thing. So we got our lists, an unordered list, an ordered list, and a definition list. The first two lists are the common ones. The third one, a little bit less common. Really very common, these first two, to put them specifically when you're trying to provide information in a quick manner. End users love, precise, quick information. And so putting information in a list on your web page is a really good thing for, short attention spans. And so here in the textbook, they just give another example of an unordered list with paragraphs in it. So each unordered list has a list item, so that would be a bullet. And then on each bullet, you're going to see a paragraph, a link inside of it. Same thing here, a paragraph with a link inside of it. I don't really see this often where you've got these line items with other block level elements inside of it. It kind of creates this kind of format. This is considered, valid. This would validate in the validator, but it's just not something you see where you're putting paragraphs inside of lists. That almost to me just defeats the purpose to where a list should be kind of short and to the point. One neat little trick with your ordered lists, and I know you guys did this in lab, is that they've got some different attributes, right? So we've got the OL tag, and then we got one attribute called start. And so here we've got this ordered list, and obviously it's going to go 1, 2, 3 on these 3 items. And then here we end that ordered list. We have a new heading and a new ordered list tag, and we could do the start of 4, and that'll go 4, 5, 6. And so it's a way, just like in Microsoft Word, you could tell it to kind of resume your list or your count. And so we got that neat little attribute, the start attribute, that'll allow us to kind of resume our count, like you might see inside of like a Microsoft Word. Obviously there's also the type attribute. And the type attribute can change it from just like a numbered list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, to be like Roman numerals or, A, B, C, D. Still having some order, but just some different attributes to throw on your lists. Then we have this concept of nested lists. Now, nested lists, this concept is used more often when you have NavBars, and there are tools now that do a lot of this coding for us, but it always starts in the HTML with a nested list, where I'm thinking of a navbar where you hover over like the home link, and then you get this drop down menu. So based on a hover effect, you get a drop down of other links, and then maybe you hover over like the third link down, and you get another, like a third tier. So the first tier is the bar. You hover the home page, you get a second tier, which would be the kind of like the links going down. And then you can hover a link there, and you can get a third pop-out tier. So these nav bars often have, based on when you hover over them, they have little pop-out links that you can click on. And so the way that's done is with nested lists. And so, here you look at this OL, or excuse me, this UL, and this is actually not a good slide to do that, but to show you how that's coded, because we're not looking at a nav bar here, so that's coming around the corner. But let's semantically look at how this coded. So here's our list on the outside. So this is our outer list, and then our first list item, LI, has a nested list within it, an OL. And so what that kind of does here is, here's our outer list, and then our first line item, our first LI, has another list inside of it. And so we actually have two nested lists, because here's one, here's the other, inside of the outer list. And it can create, again, oftentimes you do this inside of a Word document where you create multiple levels of formatting with your bullets. And so that's all we're doing here with these nested lists. The description list, again, of the three lists, this is definitely the one that's used the least. I see it like out in the wild on the web. Here you get the DL tag, so that's the container tag. The DL is the container. The term then followed by the definition. So the term is client, DT, and so this is like a client on a computer system. And the definition of a client is a computer that accesses a web page of an application of a web browser. And then you got another term, web server. Well, what is a web server? You put it in its definition. What is a local area network? You put it in its definition, so on and so forth. And what that really does is just a little bit of formatting with indenting. That's all it does, is it basically formats what it looks like a little bit in the browser. Now, when we're looking at our lists, specifically our unordered lists, we can change the bullet. And so our ordered list, we have the type attribute. So in ordered list, we have the type attribute, and we can change it to be a capital letter A, Roman numerals, and so forth. With an unordered list, what we can do is we can change the types of bullets. And so by default, we have the disk. But using CSS, we can change it to be a circle. We can change it to a square. And so probably whip this together real quick and show you real quick how this is done. Let me pull open. Just do a quick example of how this is done in code. So this is chapter 7. And so we're talking specifically about an unordered list. So what we do is we target the list, we target the UL, list, style, type, and we can change it to these values, like for example, square. Have this pop open in the browser, and voila, we've got a square. Okay, so that's that. No big deal there. Another thing that's a little bit neater than that is the image. And so you could take any image, like let me just take this little check mark here, save the image into my homework chapter 7, call this check.png, and we can change the bullets to be any image that we want. So, whatever, a check mark, someone's face, whatever image you have, keeping in mind that bullets are pretty small, so you don't want some big image necessarily. You probably want a small image. So list style image. And you can see here there's a URL. So just like a background image, you're going to have to provide the URL, which is the way they decided to code it. So list style image. Let me zoom in here. Sorry about that. URL check.png. Okay, so it's working, not well, but it's working. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Number one, I got a giant image. So here's my item 1. And now the check mark is so big that it's messed with the size of my bullets. So let's shrink that down. And you could do that using whatever image editor you want. So I'm going to choose Paint. Homework, chapter 7. I got my giant check mark. So let's edit it. And if I resize and go to pixels, I got 300. So let's do 25 by 25. Now I've got a smaller check mark. Hey, now it's looking better. Doesn't take much. And you still got positioning that you can do with this, as far as actually that doesn't look bad, but you can do like background positioning. So put it more in the center, so because these don't really exactly line up that well, but you could still position them to line up better. So that's a couple nuances that we haven't covered with our lists. Probably the neater one there is the image. And that's basically code that I just covered, just a little bit different. They changed the list style type and the list style image. And the image they put was a star. I chose a check mark and they chose a star. And then this list they styled with a circle that's built into it's a value for the list style type property. And they target their different lists. They say, okay, well, this list with the class of circle is the first one. This list with a class of star. So keep in mind, the different selectors that we learned. When you have a list with a class on it, you can specifically target that list that way. You could just say dot star, and that would work as well, and dot circle. That would work just as fine as well. But UL dot circle is more specific than just dot circle. So this would be a more specific selector, and generally speaking, that's a good thing. I'm not sure what time we started. I get into these lecture modes and I just go, and it could have been 10 minutes we've been doing this. It could have been 45 minutes already. And I like to give little breaks in between. It's been 30 to 40 minutes. Oh, there it is. I can look. Yeah, okay. Some other values for list style type. Again, list style type is this one here, right? Where we did what's built into CSS. Decimal, that's your numbering, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Decimal leading 0, obviously you just get the 0 in front. Lower alpha, capital alpha, Roman numeral, upper Roman numeral. Those are different values for list style type. And obviously these are going to be on an ordered list, right? Because obviously these all provide some sort of order. And so here's an example of using the list style type on an ordered list. And so padding and margin work the same way on lists that they do on every other element. What's a little unique here when it comes to lists is that we understand that we can target different elements. And so you might target all your paragraphs by targeting P, right? The P selector. You can target all of your unordered lists by targeting UL, but you can also target the LI. So you'll notice here, sometimes what you'll find yourself doing is you'll target the list. So if you want to change the bullets on the list, you change the list style type on the list. But sometimes you might need to target each individual LI and do something with the list items themselves. So part of it is, okay, well, what do you need to select? Do you need to select the entire list? Or do you need to select each individual list item? And so here is an example of, you can add padding on a list, and that's going to do something. Or you can add padding on a list item, and that might look a little differently. So let's do that, right? So let's launch this real quick. Just target my example here. Okay, and let's just inspect it without any padding. So if we kind of click on the list, this is what we got going on. Now you'll see here the green on our list. There's 40 pixels of padding on the left to make space for the bullet. So that's important. That's good to note, And then other than that, the blue is the content. And really there's no margin on any of this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw some padding on the list itself. And I just want you guys to kind of observe what happens. So on the list, let's clean that up. On the list, let's say padding left, and let's just make it a big 30 pixels. Well, we already had 40 pixels on the left, so it really doesn't look any different there. See that? We already had 40 pixels. So padding on the list, what if we say 130 pixels? Okay, now we're seeing it move. Now if we target the UL, you could see what it did. You could see how the spacing worked. It added a bunch of padding to the left. We had 40, so when I changed it to 30, it actually shrunk the padding on the left. But if I say 130, well, now you can see why it pushed it there. Pushed the entire UL over from the list, from the left. Now let's target an LI. Well, now when we target the LI, it actually pushes each individual LI away from the check mark, right? So now each LI is pushed over from the left. Okay, so you can see you can target these differently and space them differently based on what you target. Okay, and so that's going to be really common, not necessarily dealing with padding, but you will select the UL at times and you will select the LIs at times and style them differently. Okay, again, not necessarily with padding, but maybe with, well, maybe padding, maybe margin, maybe you change their display. You know, for example, all of our LIs are currently block level elements. Right now our LIs are stacked on top of one another. And so we know they're block. And remember, we learned that you can change any block element to display inline. See what happens there? Is that now instead of being stacked, now where did our check mark go is the wonderful question. I wonder if I don't have enough room to see the check mark. Interesting. Either I just learned something or I'm coding something, because I would have expected those check marks to still be there. Because literally all I did was tell the line items to display inline. Typically when you do this, you don't want the check marks there because you're doing a nav bar, right? So when you're telling your LIs to display inline, typically what you're doing is, you know, you're getting a nav bar set up to go across the page. Which is just really interesting to me. Either, like I said, either I just learned something. It's either they disappear or I don't know where they went. Yeah. Interesting. Let's see if I can dig a little deeper at some point and find out why that is. Let me see if I get rid of my image. See, there's still no bullets. I swear that used to not be the case, but maybe I'm just not remembering it right. Okay. We've been going for 30 minutes. This is a good breaking point. A little early for a break. I'm gonna stop here. We've been going for 30 minutes. We'll take 10 minutes and come back. So we're back from break and we get to dive a little deeper into hyperlinks, right? That probably this tag right here more than any other tag, I would say is the most important tag in HTML. And the reason I describe it as the most important tag in HTML is without linking between pages, everyone would have to know the URL of every page on the internet. That just wouldn't work. I mean, our brains don't remember things like that. You know, we can be trained to remember common websites that we go to, but even within that site, you'd have to remember Facebook.com, Facebook.com/mypage, Facebook.com/mypage/ user settings / you wouldn't be able to click on links to get from page to page. And so you'd have to know every URL. And so really this tag makes the World Wide Web functional. So extremely important tag. Relatively not that hard to code once you get the swing of it. So some attributes, obviously the href attribute, where it goes. The target attribute, typically you set the target equal to a value of underscore blank, and underscore blank is going to pop open a new tab. So target is used when you're opening a link in a new tab, which is, again, I discussed earlier in this video why you want to do that. The title is if you hover over a link, you get like a little tooltip that's good for usability and maybe a little bit more explanation as to what's on that link. Tab index, hitting the tab key will allow you, again, a user who has a hard time using a mouse, maybe for accessibility purposes. I imagine someone with shaky hands. I'm sitting here shaking the cursor. They might have a hard time clicking a link, so they're going to use the keyboard to tab onto the links, and then they hit enter to navigate to that link. And then another thing, depending on your web page, some web pages are used heavily for like data input. And so if someone is using your site over and over and over and over and over again, they might benefit by having some keyboard shortcuts to be able to kind of jump around to the different text boxes on your site and be able to use it a little bit faster. And so here you could see on your anchor tag, we set up an access key of C. And that allows you to, on a Windows computer, hit the Alt-C. If you hit Alt-C, then it will jump to that link. And the way to remember that, because Control-C is what? Control-C is copy, so it's not Control-C. So that leaves you with Shift-C, which is, typically Shift isn't used for hotkeys, So Control-C is used for hotkeys. Alt-C would be the other one option that you have. Tab index is 0, so you start that at 0, and then if that's the first one on the page, tab index of 0. And then if you were to hit tab index of 1, that would be the second link on the page, so on and so forth. And then here you see the tooltip. Again, a little bit more accessibility. Again, for users with disabilities, you want to consider coding the title attribute so that screen readers will read the title attribute. Tooltips not usable on touchscreens. Obviously, a tooltip you hover with the mouse, and so there's really no hovering on a touchscreen because you click the screen with your finger. You're going to navigate to that. If the text for a link has to be short, then you want to code the title attribute to give a little bit more explanation as to where the link is going. And so sometimes the link can be a little bit longer, which can be a good thing for search engines. But if the link is short, then search engines don't really know where the link is going, because it might not provide enough description as to where the link is going. So when it comes to search engine optimization, this is a good tip to be more clear about the page that you're navigating to. Ultimately, search engines need to understand the pages on your site, and this can help them with that. Also, you want to use the title if you have an image link, right? So if you have an image or an icon for your link, but there's no text, then that's another scenario where you want to use the title attribute for search engine optimization for SEO. Okay, we've covered these pseudo classes already. One common mistake, when it comes to coding links is people tend to just code the A tag, and Well, that'll work up until you click the link, and then it's the A no longer works. So instead of coding A to style your links, you want to code A:link. And these are different pseudo classes and one thing, if you're going to code all of these, link, visited, focus is to tab onto the link, hover is to mouse over the link, and active is when you're actively clicking the link. There's an active state that, like, for a split second the link goes active. One thing that's important to know here is that most of the time in CSS it doesn't matter if this LI goes above this UL. You know, the positioning in your CSS document doesn't really matter in many cases, unless you start getting like conflicting rules. When it comes to these pseudo classes, this order, if you don't follow this order, LVFHA, link, visited, focus, hover, active, that can actually cause your styling not to work. Okay, so it's an important thing to note here that you need to code them kind of from this top down. Many times in CSS that's not the case, but it is the case for these link pseudo classes, that you need to code them in this order, in this specific order. Link, visited, focus, hover, active. I took the time to memorize this order because, again, if you don't code it in this order, there's a good chance it's not going to work properly. And so, you know, what we can do here, text decoration none, that gets rid of the underline. And then you could just do, a lot of times you do the same thing on all of them. And so that gets rid of the underline. Border style turns on a border. And we've learned border style dashed. And so let's put border style dashed on. There you go. Just shows the border. Remember, border styles, when it comes to borders, you got border style, you got border width, and you got border color. The only one that you need to show your borders is the border style. The other three have a default setting, but there is no default for border style. So to turn borders on, you turn on the border style. Using CSS, we can have combination selectors where we say, okay, the hover, the focus, and the active are styled this way, whereas the link and probably the visited, so typically you put the A link, comma, A:visited as combination selectors, and then you put the other three together. And so that's kind of a common practice to group those together. We've said this before, but you want to have the same formatting in hover and focus. That way, if you're using keyboard or mouse, you're going to get the same formatting. target blank is opening it up in a new page. So this is now a link to Google. HTTP, when you're going external, you got to include the HTTP. And then we're going to set a target of underscore blank. And now when we click this, it's going to open up Google in a new tab. Again, what's nice, we go to Google in the new tab, and when you close that tab, you're back on your website using your website, not navigating away from your site, which is important for obvious reasons. You want people to stay on your site, buy your product, use your services. So target equals underscore blank, useful. So it's just showing, opening up in a new tab. This is a good one. So these links, like on Wikipedia, and I don't know, pick a topic, Star Wars. And so this is a long page. There's a lot of information about Star Wars. And so obviously we got links here. And these links are going to jump to different placeholders in the page. And so these are links to placeholders. What I mean by placeholders is you click on the link. The placeholder is this heading, this film heading. So this is this film. If you look here, this film has an ID of film. Okay. Therefore, this link, when I inspect this link, you notice the anchor tag has an href attribute of the ID film, pound film. And so that's how you do that. It's actually surprisingly simple. You just have a link that points to the ID of another element on your page. In this case, film, the film link points to the ID of film. The ID of film is on this heading. Now, one thing for this to work is your page has to be long enough for the browser to jump to that section. If you don't have enough content on the page to navigate like lower or navigate up higher, it's not going to work. It only works when you have a lot of content. I see this a lot on different sites nowadays, especially like image galleries where you're just like browsing images and you're just scroll, and you get to the bottom, it says back to top. You probably see that back to top. Let's see if we can go here. I don't know if there's a back to top here. I would expect there to be a back to top, but back to top. Yeah, I don't see a link to top, but a lot of words top, but no links to top. So again, the way that's done is, as I demonstrated, you give an ID to an element, and then you create, so that's an ID of top, and then you create a link that would be kind of at the bottom of the page, and that link would link to pound top. The question in the chat box, how do you make boxes around your links, like when you hover over them on inside ranking? Okay, good question. That's probably just on a hover. So let's go to inside ranking. Let's inspect that. Oh, okay. So all that does, we got a background color, and when you hover, you change the background color. So let's do that real quick. I already have a link. And let's say the link has a color of red, but then when you hover, we're going to go gray. Right? So the link and the visited have a background color of red when you hover it, or maybe when you would focus it, as we learned, that's good to style them the same. See that? Does that answer the question? Good question. By the way, guys, we need to be asking more questions. I will honestly admit that these lecture formats, I get a lot less questions when I'm doing them in this format. When I'm doing an in-person lecture, which I've done for many years now, I probably get 5 times the number of questions. So I want to encourage you to ask more questions. Thank you for the question. Links to media files. Well, these kind of work how you might expect them to. You got a PDF document, and I think of a PDF document, just think of all your homework assignments. And inside Rankin, you click on a link and it opens up in a browser window. PDFs used to open up in like Adobe Reader. It would open up in a different application completely. Okay, but now browsers have PDF readers built into them. And so now you can just open up a PDF in the browser itself. You can also open up MP3s and MP4s, which oddly enough, these videos that I record, not oddly enough, but these videos that I record in OBS, they're all MP4s, right? So MP3s, obviously audio files. MP4s are your video files. So you can create links to PDFs. And one attribute that you want to put in there is this type attribute of application PDF, target of blank, so it opens up in a new tab. And that way you can open up a PDF in the browser, which is super nice. A link to an MP3 is going to work just how you would anticipate it. You would link to the file itself. You're going to give it a type of audio MPEG. Here's a link that links to a PowerPoint, so you can get PowerPoint to open up in a browser. You got the old mail to links that we already had a hands-on test over. Here's a really neat one, and I think there's a written test question over this. The href attribute that has a value of tel, T-E-L. Now the way this will work is that if you're on a smartphone and you click that link, I'm sure we've all seen it before. You can click a link on a smartphone and it opens up in the phone app and starts dialing, or at least puts the number in for you so that you can click call. So sometimes you've seen that. Other times you got to copy and paste a phone number. So this is really nice, a really nice thing to have on your website, that just makes it a little bit easier to use for the end user. They don't have to copy and paste a phone number. So again, this is a tel value on an href attribute. And you also got a Skype value. Now the interesting thing here is we're more of a Zoom society nowadays than Skype. So I wonder if they're gonna start supporting Zoom, because Skype is kind of like the software. I don't know. You guys use Skype much? I don't use it much.
It's pretty dead.
Yeah, it's pretty dead. It's not, so it's really just, it's not like you can just say, Zoom in there and it's going to work in other softwares. It's really what's supported by the browsers. So we're kind of limited as far as like these different values, as far as what's supported out there. We're limited. Yeah, Skype's kind of dead. Okay, I would agree with that. I haven't used Skype in years. But just some ways to link to some different things. I would say that this one much more useful than the Skype. This mail to value, again, I'm not a big fan of that because most websites nowadays, they just have like a contact form where you just put in your name, you put in your email address, you put in a message, you click submit, and that sends an email. Okay, so that's a lot more common nowadays than these links that use the default mail client on a person's computer. Yeah, I remember. Was it Uvu? Yeah, I remember that one for a little bit, Parker. Okay, when it comes to Nav Menus, again, so we got the Nav tag. That's going to be your parent. We're going to put our links inside of an unordered list. So semantically, what we're looking at is an unordered list of links. And then inside of each list item, we're going to have our anchor tags. Right? So you start with the nav tag. And we've discussed the display property in detail. We've been tested over this. Remember, we can display block, so we can change an inline element to block. In other words, it can cause line breaks. Keep in mind that block level elements are allowed to have a custom width and height. Okay, so that's a good thing. So like an inline element, like an anchor tag, if you tried to give it a width and a height, it wouldn't work unless you changed it to be display block. Okay, inline elements do not cause line breaks. Display inline block is your hybrid between these two. What I mean by hybrid is that it's inline, so it doesn't cause line breaks. However, you can set a custom width on it like a block level element. So display inline block, I'd say probably popped up maybe like 7-8 years ago. And it's a nice little hybrid between these two values. And then display none is how you hide it. Like if you want to hide content, and a lot of times you'll do this with your JavaScript. In other words, you hover over, I always use this example, but like on Netflix, like you hover over a movie and all of a sudden a paragraph shows up, with the movie description. And so that paragraph is in the HTML, but it's hidden with display none until you hover over the image, and then it turns the display to inline or display block and makes it visible. And you can use, JavaScript or maybe even just pure HTML on an image hover. So you would target the img tag with the hover pseudo class. And then you would change the display of a paragraph. Probably use JavaScript to do that. Anyways. Then we got some vertical navigation menus. So we actually get into here and we code a vertical nav bar. What's nice about this is that our unordered list is automatically vertical. So what we wind up doing is we tell the bullets to go away. So we're going to target our list, tell the bullets to go away. That's that line. We're going to tell each list item to display block. However, that's kind of by default the case. Each anchor tag, though, to display block. Because anchor tags are by default inline. And that's going to allow you to, set like a custom width on the anchor tags. And so pretty straightforward. And actually, folks, this is just a little heads up. This is what your homework is for tonight. Your homework is to take these book examples of the nav bar and just code them. Like literally, the code is given to you. You just have to get it to work. You just have to code it. And what I mean by that. So just a heads up, You'll be coding your first NavBars tonight for homework. And again, the code comes right out of the textbook. So that's a vertical navbar. We got 2 horizontal navbars, so obviously horizontal going across the page, and they're just styled differently. Really, that's all there is. So you got these big kind of button-looking links, and then you just got more simple text-based links. It looks like there's a hover effect on each one of them, so you like hover over and the underline goes away, or you hover over this one and the text becomes yellow. Okay, and again, I'll these are all in Chapter 7. There's a 2-tier navigation system, so the idea is that you hover over a link, which might have a second tier. Like, so there would be a couple of links in here. This would be a nested list, and in that nested list, we would hide the inner list. So we would display none on that inner list. So here's our nav, here's our unordered list. Inside of our unordered list, here's our nested list. Here's another nested list. And so we would hide these. These ULs would be set to display none by default until you hover. And then when you hover, here's your hover, you change it to display block. So here's your display none, and then here's your hover or a focus, and you change it to display block. So this basically says it's not visible, and then when you hover, it is visible. And they actually go one deeper and do a 3-tiered navigation system. All right, which is just another nested list. So we got, here's our first list, here's our inner list, and here's a third list inside of that. And it's gonna, the concept is gonna be basically the same thing. Here's another nested list. Okay, and so again, it's easy for me to kind of highlight it. But the way that you're going to learn this is by coding each one of these. And so when I look at the homework, you're coding 1 navbar, here's 2, here's 3. Here's 4, a 2-tier nav. Here's 5. So you'll have 5 different pages with NavBars on them. I would make 5 separate HTML pages. That way you're not going to get conflicting CSS on each one of these. Oh, there you go. Evan says, NVIDIA uses a 3-tier nav system for their products page. So here's my caveat. This is a good assignment to see how NavBars are structured and to see how these multi-tier systems work. I will say that this has been updated. There is, just like using floats has been updated with Flexbox, there are some newer approaches towards navigation bars, NavBars, that we will learn. But it's kind of like, the fundamentals. I would call this a fundamental navbar. And so it's good to understand why we structure this way and how it works. All right, folks, that leaves me at the end of the lecture. Your reading assignment is to read Chapter 6. And then I'm going to open up your homework here shortly. I'm going to stop the video.